This program is brought to you by Emory University.
I want to talk today about some of the early days of baseball. The philosopher Kenneth Burke once wrote that every machine contains a cowpath. He meant there's never anything that's really completely new. Somewhere in even the most complicated human invention, there'll be some trace of earlier ways of doing or thinking something. Because French revolutionaries in 1789 wanted to be different from the nobility, they had always driven their carriages and coaches on the left-hand side of the road, the French revolutionists decided they would drive theirs on the right. Now the world has followed suit. Baseball has more cowpaths in it than almost anything else in American culture. The game of baseball is really like a time machine. It transports both the players and the spectators back into the past. That's one of the things about baseball that endears it to fans and baffles its critics. Why, they say, does a batter get to run to first base if the catcher drops a third strike? What's a balk? Why should it be illegal? Why 3 strikes but 4 balls? Over the next 14 weeks, we'll learn the answers to these questions and to a lot more as well. The history of early baseball is a crazy mix of half-truths and outright fabrications. Over the last 50 years, historians have proved beyond doubt that baseball wasn't really invented in 1839 in a pasture at Cooperstown, New York, by a man called Abner Doubleday. That was a fiction created by patriotic boosters who wanted a completely American pedigree for the sport. When he was supposed to be in a pasture at Cooperstown inventing baseball, Doubleday was actually a cadet at the United States Military Academy in West Point. He couldn't possibly have invented the game. You can see by looking at some of the images that games played with a bat, ball, and bases were played by children for at least a century before Alexander Cartwright, another important figure in early baseball, and the Knickerbockers, one of the early baseball clubs, almost a century before they played ball in 1845 in the Elysian Fields on the outskirts of Hoboken, New Jersey. The year before the United States agreed on their new Constitution, an undergraduate at Princeton noted in his diary he had spent the afternoon playing something he called baseball. An early description of the game of baseball comes from a book published in Germany in 1796. That book contains a detailed set of rules for a game called English baseball. That book, called Games for Practice and Recreation, contains several core principles of the modern game. Among those, batters are given 3 swings at a pitched ball, runners move in a counterclockwise direction around a series of bases or free places, and 2 teams, varying numbers of players, 2 teams alternate between hitting and playing the field. A game involving a bat and ball may have occurred as early as 1609 in the Virginia colony of Jamestown, when a group of Polish settlers who had been brought to the English settlement because of their skills in glass making entertained themselves and small groups of curious Indian spectators on Sundays with the sport of pilka palatora, or bat ball. Recorded evidence of games like baseball goes back even further. The sport of hitting a small ball with a round bat seems to have existed in medieval times. Take a look at some of these illuminated miniatures from the 13th and 14th centuries. They depict a batter swinging at a ball thrown or tossed gently by a pitcher. The pictorial style in these medieval illustrations, as is typical of most medieval art, it's not realistic. Nevertheless, in these images, the pitcher seems to be positioned pretty close to the batter, and he seems to be tossing the ball in an underhand motion rather than throwing it. It leads one to believe that in these early manifestations of baseball, if that's what they are, pitchers and batters played in a spirit of mutual cooperation. This is one of those historical connections I like to make with baseball. On many occasions, I've seen high school players engaged in what seems to be the same activity that's depicted in these medieval drawings, One boy kneels close by a batter and gently tosses baseballs or small, lightweight practice plastic balls to strike at. Numerous games similar to baseball were played during colonial times in America, as well as in England and on the European continent. Among these were games called stool ball, where players used their bare hands to strike at a ball, much as in volleyball. And there were many different forms of a recreational sport called cat ball. 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4, old cat. Also popular in the 17th and 18th century were games called rounders, and of course cricket. Almost all of these games either preceded baseball or were contemporary with it, and they all resemble baseball in at least two important aspects. The first, players are required to move from one base, or free station, sometimes they were posts, around a closed circuit after they have struck a ball with a wooden stick, rather than with the hands or the feet. And there's, secondly, at least one more common element in all these baseball-like games. It's probably their most important and most unusual feature. It's an unusual concept, really, the idea of a state of being in which certain players are understood to be out and therefore can't take part in the action. In baseball, a player who fails to reach base successfully, either by getting a hit or receiving a walk, must retire temporarily from the action, from the field of play. To get a hit in baseball, by the way, it doesn't mean that you swung the bat and managed to connect with the ball. You may have hit the ball, all right, but unless you hit it where they ain't, as one old ball player used to say, you haven't got a hit. When my son was playing t-ball, I used to get very excited when he actually hit the ball. He's a pitcher. He never really was a very good hitter. But actually, to get a hit, to hit the ball in that way, you don't get a hit. If you fail to get a hit in baseball, you're forced to withdraw from the field of play. This distinguishes baseball from team sports like football, basketball, or soccer. Try and picture what basketball would be like if every time a player who took a shot and missed had to sit down temporarily until his turn came round again. There's important differences between baseball and other team sports. You've probably heard the line from a movie, A League of Their Own, "There's no crying in baseball." Well, sometimes there is. I'd say there's more heartbreak in baseball than in any other sport. But it's even more true that there's no clock in baseball. If the score is tied at the end of 9 innings, teams will play a 10th, 11th, 12th, or 13th inning, or however long it takes, until at last one inning concludes with one team having at least one more run than the other. It takes as long as it takes. And if a game goes on all day and into the night, that's okay. One of the best baseball books I've read lately is called Bottom of the 33rd. It's the story of the longest game ever played in professional baseball. And I have no doubt that one day a game will last even longer. In theory, a baseball game can last until the end of time, when the last galactic fires burn out. When you read about the early history of baseball this week, think about these and any other important characteristics that make this game different from any other.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.